days. Fueled by chaos and confusion, the virus known as COVID-19 has caused a global pandemic and an uncertain future.
85% of the deaths that have occurred could have been avoided. What made the difference? Early treatment.
There's a whole lot of lies here, like the origin of the virus.
They literally weaponized the virus, and it produces the most toxic protein known to man.
It's freedom, not feardom. So I've always known, I said, this is a medical issue, but it's a constitutional crisis.
This vaccine should not have been injected into a single human in the first place.
I can't think of a more important right to fight for right now in America. Because if there's a medical product you don't want to receive and you refuse it, and you can't get a job without it, then you don't have any rights.
A devastating loss and a search for the truth. One doctor's journey led him to a startling discovery that transformed his perception, and he's now standing up against a narrative that has harmed so many people. Before we get to that, I want to welcome Latricia Willis to the table. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing great, and I'm just grateful to be here.
And learn, things that you're not going to hear anywhere else.
Yes, exactly. Very grateful.
And the Kindle.
I'm excited about this show. We're going to learn more things today and get some explanations that we need.
Yes, Rachel Ann Brown, how are you?
I'm good. It's easier to go along with the narrative. It's harder to stand up for truth and fight for justice, but it's always far more rewarding in the end.
It really is. Cindy Murdoch, how are you?
I'm good. I was just thinking, it's hard for humanity, I guess, to believe something so evil could be put in our path of life and affected us the way it did. So thank you for today's show.
All right. Well, since the rollout of the COVID vaccines, we've seen alarming reports of sudden heart-related deaths, leaving many to question if these shots were ever safe, as many government officials and pharmaceutical industry personnel have claimed. Let's take a look.
Since the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine, there's been a mandate for injection across the world. Despite the mainstream's narrative surrounding the vaccine's safety and efficiency, warnings from various doctors and conflicting research shed a different light.
The COVID-19 vaccines, actually all of them, cause myocarditis or heart inflammation, and it's fatal. It's fatal. This is a fatal complication, and we're seeing sudden death now on a massive scale in younger people, and these products are still in use. America is outraged.
One cardiologist on the front lines and unwilling to turn a blind eye to the risks ahead is Dr. Asim Malhotra.
It is my duty and responsibility as a consultant cardiologist and public health campaigner to urgently inform doctors, patients, and members of the public that the COVID mRNA vaccine has likely played a significant role or been a primary cause of unexpected cardiac arrests, heart attacks, strokes, cardiac arrhythmias, and heart failure since 2021.
The link between the COVID-19 vaccine and declining health and death rates is undeniably there, leading many to pull back the veil to potentially one of the biggest crimes and cover-ups of our time.
Well, he is a British cardiologist, author, and health advocate that is making waves for changing his perspective on COVID vaccinations. And he's here to tell us about his journey. Please welcome Dr. Asim Malhotra. Welcome.
Hi.
Welcome, Dr. Asim.
Yes.
We're so honored to have you here at the table.
Thank you for having me. Delighted to be here.
I talked to my friends across the pond by WhatsApp, and I got a message from someone who said, "You've got to meet this Dr. Joni. He's coming to your area." We wanted to make sure and get you on the show because you're not over here that often, and we wanted to hear what you have to say because there are a lot of doctors and nurses and people in the medical industry that are seeing something that they cannot be quiet about. Tell us a little bit about your journey, because I know you started out encouraging people to get the vaccine.
So it's been quite revelatory for me, certainly the last couple of years. My background, first and foremost, is I'm a consultant cardiologist. I've been a qualified doctor now for well over 20 years. In the last decade or so, I became a public health advocate, really to try and understand why our populations were getting sicker, increasing burden of chronic disease. As a cardiologist, my special interest was heart disease, and we haven't really managed to have significant impact on reducing heart disease over the last 2 or 3 decades that we would have liked. So I was a root cause analysis guy. And in that process, coming up to the COVID vaccines, I had basically, come to the conclusion that there was huge amount of corruption in terms of medical decision-making because of these very powerful commercial interests that were influencing guidelines, influencing what doctors tell patients, influencing what drugs people take, and without a real attention to the root cause of the problem, which ultimately comes down mainly from heart disease perspective to lifestyle. It's estimated now that the third most common cause of death globally after heart disease and cancer is prescribed medications. What your doctor prescribes to you because of side effects, which are mainly preventable. So I had been very vocal on that front, but I had never, ever thought that a vaccine could cause significant harm. In the medical profession, even still, vaccines are kind of the holy grail. They're untouchable. They are, by definition, safe and effective.
So when the COVID vaccine came down the pike, initially, what did you think about it?
Well, I was a little bit skeptical about what the benefits would be, but I wasn't that concerned that there would be any problems with it. And for me as a doctor, my primary responsibility is to protect and look after my patients. So I took it very early on. Having helped out at the vaccine center, I took my first dose of Pfizer in December 2020, and then second dose at the end of January. So I took 2 doses, not expecting there to be any significant problem in terms of harms. And we even went on Good Morning Britain, which is one of the most popular breakfast programs in the UK, because I'd convinced a friend of mine who's a film director to take the vaccine, and she then tweeted out. But at the very beginning, we were only recommending it early on, Joni, for high-risk people. Right. Things kept changing. And I was only, even at that point, I said, okay, well, listen, high-risk people, yes. I don't really see any need for anybody else having it. So I went to tackle vaccine hesitancy on Good Morning Britain, and I said, I understand and empathize with people who are concerned, because let's look at the history of the drug industry and all the fraud they've committed over the years. However, I did not think the vaccines would be an issue, and I kind of left it at that. And then things changed over several months. First and foremost, I think we realized quite within a few months that it wasn't stopping transmission. And I was seeing that certainly around the world, not in the UK initially, there were mandates happening, in the US in particular. And I thought, this is crazy. This doesn't make any sense, because you're not protecting anybody else by having the vaccine. You're only protecting yourself. Right. So that was one thing.
And that's the narrative that, the media was saying, if you love people, you're going to kill people if you don't get the vaccination.
Yeah. No, and then, you look at these clips now, and it's just extraordinary. Rachel Maddow on CNN saying, if you take the vaccine, you are 100%, protected. Right. And this we know this now, was a complete and total nonsense. Right. So information was sort of evolving. And then one of the things that happened to me was I met up with a cardiologist friend of mine who I consider one of the brightest cardiologists in the country. And he said to me, Asim, I've got to tell you something. This is April 2021. He said, I've not had the vaccine. I said, really? Why not? He said, well, I looked at Pfizer's original trial and something concerned me. He said, in the supplementary appendix, there were 4 cardiac arrests in the vaccine group and only 1 in the placebo group. He said, it may be just by chance, but if this is a real signal, we're going to have a problem as we move forward. He said, I hope I'm wrong. That's what he said to me. Wow. So I thought, I kind of just, it lodged in the back of my mind. And I kind of, in July 2021, my father, who was a very 73-year-old, very active man, he called me. He lived in Manchester and I live in London. It's about 200 miles difference. And he called me and he said, Asim, I've got chest discomfort. So I talked to him and very quickly I got concerned. It sounded like it was cardiac.
He said he had chest discomfort?
Yeah.
So he had never previously had anything. Like you said, he was very healthy, very active.
Absolutely, nothing at all.
Nothing.
He had high blood pressure, but was well controlled. But he was, in his community, he was considered one of the fittest guys. And we have, in our family with no history of heart disease or anything like that. In medicine, 80% of your diagnosis comes from the history. That means if you are a good doctor and you know your stuff and you listen to your patient, 80% of the time, even before you've examined them and done any tests, you should get the diagnosis. So his history sounded like it was cardiac, not like a big heart attack, but I said, okay, there's something not, call an ambulance. He was a bit reluctant to call an ambulance. He wanted to call his neighbors instead, who were doctors. And there was a back and forth conversation with me and him, and I then went for a shower. I said, I'm just going to get on a train and come up and see you. And I knew that he would probably be in hospital, even if there was nothing on the EKG. We normally keep people in hospital and monitor them, do blood tests. So I thought, oh, that's going to happen anyway, so I better go up and be with him. Came out of the shower, called him, no answer. Kept calling, no answer. Now I'm getting worried. And then his neighbor, who was a doctor, answered the phone. She was hysterical. Said, Asim, your dad's had a cardiac arrest. We're doing CPR on him. I then went into full-on cardiology mode, in the sense I tried to kind of just keep calm. I said, listen, what happened? Said, well, we walked in. He looked like he was a bit sweaty, with a husband who's also a doctor. And then he literally just keeled over. And they'd actually already called the ambulance by that point. I said, actually, I said to them straight away, I said, listen, he's really lucky. He's had a witness cardiac arrest. He's got 2 doctors doing CPR on him. The ambulance will be here in 10 minutes. That's how long they should
These are the
take.
things you're telling yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. But I was trying to just, I was just actually just trying to keep them calm.
Right.
I said, listen, actually, I said, listen, let's look at this as a positive. They'll defibrillate him. It'll be a lot of my work, Joni, prior to this, I published in medical journals all about this stuff, cardiac arrest, what helps survival. So I know this stuff inside out.
Yeah.
But the ambulance didn't show up for 30 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
And when they did show up, they FaceTimed me. They put the monitor on him. It was a flat line. There was nothing to shock. He was gone. I just said stop. Wow. And then I started an investigation myself, because I thought this is very odd. Yes. Why is it taking 30 minutes? And long story short, I got contacted by somebody close to government in the Department of Health, basically saying that Asim, she was a nurse and she was crying. She knew my dad, and she was just crying like with what happened. Said, Asim, we knew for several weeks throughout the whole country, ambulance crews were not getting to people in time for heart attacks and cardiac arrests. But there was a deliberate effort from the government to suppress this information from the doctors and from the people, which would have changed his outcome, because we wouldn't have asked them to call an ambulance, taken him straight to hospital, probably been defibrillated. So then I wrote about this, and in one of the national newspapers, it became a BBC headline story on the ambulance, and I was the first to expose it. The reason I'm telling you this, though, Joni, there's something else related to this before we get onto the vaccine issue, is in that process, when I realized what had happened, I contacted a cardiologist who I knew, who I respected, one of the good guys, and I said, this is what's going on, and I'm going to expose this in the newspaper. He said, Asim, I wouldn't do that if I were you. You're only going to make yourself enemies. And I said, what about our duty to patients and the public? But what he was saying to me is that don't even expose this, because you're going to be highlighting failures in the National Health Service, and that isn't a good thing to do. And I was like, well, how are we going to resolve the situation unless we actually identify the problem and talk about it?
The truth needs to come out.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So then he had a postmortem done. And the findings of the postmortem were shocking to me, because it revealed that 2 of his 3 arteries, major arteries of the heart, coronary arteries, had severe blockages in them. Now, I knew his cardiac history inside out. He'd had some scans a few years earlier. Everything was pretty good. So in my mind, and this is my expertise, something had caused him to have a rapid acceleration in heart disease. So let's say something that may have affected him in 15 or 20 years has suddenly caused a problem in 6 months. And I thought, I couldn't figure that out. The only explanation I gave to myself at the time, which was the only thing I could put my finger on, was he under severe stress? Because we both were mourning the loss of my mother. We lost my mother only a few years earlier. Was it, all the lockdown stuff? Is that what's caused it? And that's the only explanation I give, but it didn't sit right with me. And then several months later, the first thing that alerted me to a problem was a publication in one of the American journals called Circulation. It's a big cardiology journal, well respected. And a cardiothoracic surgeon had done some tests on several hundred of his patients, middle-aged. And what he'd found after 2 doses of the mRNA vaccines, Moderna or Pfizer, markers in the blood, which are linked very strongly to cardiovascular risk, had gone through the roof just within 2 months. To give you some perspective, their baseline risk on average went from an 11% risk of having a heart attack in the next 5 years to 25%. Now that's huge, so huge. And when I saw that, I was like, now there's something here, there's a signal. It was then backed up. It all happened within the space of a couple of weeks, Joni. It was then backed up by the fact that I got contacted by a journalist saying, Dr. Malhotra, we've got an unexplained increase in heart attacks in Scotland. And then the thing that really broke the camel's back for me, the straw that broke the camel's back for me, is a cardiologist who I know from a very reputed, prestigious institution in the UK called me up very upset. And he said, Asim, a group of researchers here, cardiologists, have accidentally found from the use of a technology called cardiac imaging, very advanced cardiac imaging, in vaccinated versus unvaccinated, there's huge coronary inflammation. But they had a meeting and said, we're not going to publish these findings because it may affect our funding from the drug industry. So for me, I was now in a situation of, like, listen, there's a signal here. I need to talk about it. So I went on a program called GB News in the UK in sort of November 2021. And I said, listen, this is what I know. It needs to be looked into, it needs to be investigated. I didn't talk about pausing the vaccine at that point. And that went viral, even went in the States, and lots of people were talking about it. But I then experienced a backlash from a very prestigious medical body that I'm affiliated with, where a number of doctors anonymously had said that they need to discipline me for spreading anti-vax disinformation.
COVID lies.
Which was so extraordinary because I had 2 doses and I went on Good Morning Britain telling people that it was safe. So I just find that, and then I realized we're dealing with something much bigger than I've ever dealt with before, even being an advocate. So I then spent 9 months critically appraising the data. I published in a medical journal, which doesn't get money from industry. It was a very rigorously peer-reviewed journal. It allowed me to write 10,000 words because once I understood what happened, I wanted to walk people through it. So this is what the data tells us on the vaccine, but this actually was all a direct result of system failures and structural failures that have existed and been getting worse for decades. Essentially too much power. These big drug industries in terms of how they influence medical decision-making, how they influence regulators, education, everything. And this is how this has happened, but here are the solutions moving forward.
Wow, that was a lot. I mean, I just want to say, thank you for having the courage to speak the truth. Like, there are actually, folks, there are a lot of doctors that are coming forward, and they actually love their patients more than they love the money that is furnished through the pharmaceuticals. But we know the pharmaceuticals control everything. I'm really concerned about those individuals who are damaged forever. I mean, neurologically, heart, blood clots, we can go on and on with how many different side effects that they have encountered as a result of having the vaccine. It's almost like they're being gaslighted and we don't have a place for them, or you've got anxiety, or you've got issues or mental issues. And the hospitals, they don't know what to do with them. And yet these people have been damaged for life.
Yeah, it's truly horrific, Joni. The serious adverse event rate as well, to put things in perspective, is probably somewhere between 1 in 800 and 1 in 300, okay? And that's a lot of people that, have taken the vaccine who are going to have serious adverse events. And some of those, unfortunately, are going to cause them to die, and they're going to have cardiac arrest and heart attacks or whatever. But we need to have that conversation, and there needs to be an acknowledgement, first and foremost, by the establishment, by doctors, that this is real, right? This is not something that's rare. This is not being run by conspiracy theorists and anti-vaxxers. This is these are very credible people who are talking about this. And then we can start helping those people. And that's a big issue. It's a massive issue. I mean, one of the reasons I'm here in Dallas at the moment is actually I'm speaking at the FLCC conference, Frontline COVID Doctors Conference. And these are leading figures, and some of them have been on your show, who are talking about what are the best ways to manage and treat these patients.
Yes, so good. Well, in 2022, Senator Ron Johnson hosted a panel on the topic of COVID, and a registered nurse shared a startling revelation regarding heart issues and children. Take a look.
My name is Nicole Sirotek. I'm a registered nurse. I've been a registered nurse for over a decade. 2 days ago, I flew out my first 10-year-old with a heart attack, and I had to fight the doctor in the ER because he's like, 10-year-olds don't have heart attacks. And I argued back and forth for 30 minutes to force his hand to get an EKG, to find out that he had almost a complete STEMI, which is ST elevated myocardial infarction, for which you could see it lit up on the 12-lead EKG. And he's like, well, that's not possible. And I'm like, well, he was just vaccinated yesterday. It is very much possible. At any given time, people are getting a hold of me and the nurse advocates at American Frontline Nurses to help advocate, because as you've seen, there is victim shaming that it's anxiety, it's this. But in actuality, if they put down that it was a vaccine injury, the physician, the corporation, the hospital, the clinic, they actually won't get reimbursed. So it gets labeled as anxiety or neuropathy or Guillain-Barré syndrome, when in actuality, it's very realistically a vaccine injury.
So I know you've heard countless stories like that. How do you respond to that? I mean, you have to think about the nurses that are seeing this. They're right there, witnessing this happen.
That's so true.
Yeah, I've never heard anything like it before, Joni. It's quite shocking. And I also myself am managing people with vaccine injuries. Some of them not realizing, for example, people that have had very stable heart conditions that have suddenly flared up, and their cardiologist can't explain why they've suddenly had, a heart attack again within a few months. And the only common denominator between them being stable and having a heart attack is they've had 2 doses of Pfizer or AstraZeneca or whatever. So yes, but these testimonies are important. I think the more people that speak out, I think the more that the truth will be disseminated, and the more chance we have of actually breaking through into the medical establishment and the government to put their hands up saying, we've got a problem here, let's pause these vaccines and let's investigate this.
Yeah, for people watching, I think it's really important to understand that people who have not been vaccinated, and especially people who have not been vaccinated that have had COVID, are not dangerous.
Right.
To other people. That's the big, if you don't wear your mask, if you're not vaccinated, you're going to do this, that, and the other, when the truth is what concerning natural immunity?
Natural immunity is fantastic when it comes to COVID. Your risk of people can get reinfected, of course, and the virus, there's mutations, etc.
Because the virus is a virus,
yes,
right?
But the risk of severe disease is negligible. Almost close to zero people have died having had natural immunity and then being reinfected. However, this is really important. When I published my paper, I put this in there. If you've had COVID and then you have the vaccine, certainly within the first few months, you're almost 3 times more likely to suffer side effects.
Wow.
Right? So the advising people who've had COVID to then have the vaccine, in my view, unless there's some very specific indication, as a blanket approach, is criminal. It's criminal.
I know you were talking about looking at the different lots for Pfizer and Moderna. It's interesting because there are a lot of people say, well, there are other people who didn't, really have any side effects. But we also know, and I know from having Dr. Robert Malone on, and who understands about the mRNA technology better than any doctor, he said there were lots where the mRNA is very unstable. And so actually before they got the shot, it had it was breaking down and did not have the effect. But where it was stable, with some of the lots, those were the people that seemed to have some of the most severe side effects.
And weren't there different lots that had different doses?
Yeah. Talk a little bit about that.
It's possible. When you look back at the original randomized trial done by Pfizer that led to the approval of the vaccine by regulators, coercion, mandates, that original trial on its own, when it was reanalyzed by independent, very credible research and published in the journal Vaccine, they found in the trial you were more likely to suffer a serious adverse event from the vaccine, hospitalization, disability, life-changing event, than you were to be hospitalized with COVID. What does that mean? It means that it's likely that this vaccine, mRNA vaccine in particular, should not have been injected into a single human in the first place.
Well,
that's what we need to. That's the discussion we need to be having.
And it was here in Fort Worth, where Aaron Siri, the attorney who I've had on, and the judge actually made Pfizer turn over those documents. They wanted to turn over small amounts. It would take 70-something years to get. And the judge said, no, you have to turn that information. And so the more that comes out, there's still, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of pages, but that's what you're talking about. All of that hidden until a judge made Pfizer open up and say, okay, this is what the trial said. And it was startling as they began to discover what really happened in those trials.
Yeah, and also to explain, it's a really important issue that you've raised there, Joni, because I think most doctors and certainly the public don't realize that the information that historically on many things that doctors make clinical decisions on, whatever pills you're prescribed, is often based upon data that's kept commercially confidential. So they'll have tens of thousands of pages, if not more, on these trial participants, like studying every single thing about them every day, what's going on, what side effects, etc. Then they do a summary report. So Pfizer designed the trial, they did their own analysis, they then produced conclusions. They give those conclusions to the regulator. The regulator clearly didn't do its job properly, which is also compounded by the fact that the FDA in this country gets 65% of its funding from pharma. In the UK, we get 86% of our funding from pharma, the regulator. I gave a lecture during the British Medical Association conference in the summer of 2022, last year. And one of the people that attended it was the chairman of the British Medical Association. And when I told him this in the talk, his jaw dropped. He actually didn't believe it. So imagine somebody that is influencing health policy and stuff like that was not even aware of this situation. And he said to me, you know, when I spoke to him privately about all this, he said, most of my colleagues in senior health policy roles are getting their information on the vaccine in terms of harms and benefits from the BBC. Rochelle Walensky, former director of the CDC, said something similar, that her optimism from the vaccine came from CNN. A CNN news report, which was almost verbatim a reproduction of Pfizer's press release. So absolutely. So what's happening here is we have got these very big, powerful corporations who have a legal obligation to produce profit for their shareholders, but not to give you the best treatment, who historically have quite often behaved in what has been described by forensic psychologist Dr. Robert Hare as psychopathic in the way that they conduct their business. And we are distrusting them. We're trusting these psychopathic, let's just call it out for what it is, Joni. It is what it is, right? Psychopathic entities that are having more and more control over our lives. People don't know this, right? And when people become aware of it, then we can address the root cause of the problem. And this is ultimately going to need changes in the law that can then protect the public from these manipulations.
Because it's much bigger than just the vaccine here.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, I mean, first, I remember Dr. Peter McCullough, a dear friend and cardiologist that you know, who's spoken out. They've tried to destroy him. When I say they, the left and people who have interest in money and power, et cetera. But he said, you know, at first it was kind of hard for me to believe that there could be evil attached to it. But he said, I have no doubt now there is a battle going on.
Absolutely.
Do you sense that as well?
Yeah, 100%. I interviewed Marcia Angel for a Guardian article a few years ago. Marcia Angel was a former editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, #1 medical journal in the world. And she said to me, Asim, the real battle we have in healthcare is one of truth versus money.
Wow.
So true.
So good. Money. Well, I know y'all are just blown away by everything. We're out of time.
Oh, my goodness.
But Dr. Asim, thank you so much for joining us at the table. I want you to remember that your health is important, and God wants us to take care of ourselves, and that starts with being informed. So you can make the best decision for you and your family, and you say, well, I don't agree with you, Joni. That's okay. Because if we're here in America, we should be able to agree to disagree.
Absolutely.
But those freedoms are being taken away from us right now, and we have to stand up. And that's why we bring you this information. So you don't have to live in fear, and you can make an informed decision. If you're watching today and maybe you're struggling to find hope, maybe you've lost a loved one, maybe you're dealing with fear and anxiety in your life, that's really why Daystar exists. We have that toll-free number on the screen. We'd love to just encourage you to call that number. We have amazing prayer partners, and we count it a privilege to pray with you today. I do want to thank Dr. Asim for joining us at the table. For more from him, you can visit him online at drasim.com. And just let him know how much you appreciate what he's doing. Pray for him and watch this and all of our other COVID-related content. Of course, you have to go to censor.daystar.com because we've been censored as well, but they can't censor Daystar. And we're reaching around the world. And for as long as God allows us that opportunity, we'll continue to speak the truth. I want to thank you for watching. Don't be fearful. The word says God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. And so you be encouraged today. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye for today.
chaos and confusion, the virus known as COVID-19 has caused a global pandemic and an uncertain future.
85% of the deaths that have occurred could have been avoided. What made the difference? Early treatment.
There's a whole lot of lies here, like the origin of the virus.
They literally weaponize the virus, and it produces the most toxic protein known to man.
It's freedom, not feardom. So I've always known, I said, this is a medical issue, but it's a constitutional crisis.
We need to stand up and actually stand against this tyranny. They're trying to destroy your liberties one at a time and all of your freedoms.
I can't think of a more important right to fight for right now in America. Because if there's a medical product you don't want to receive and you refuse it, and you can't get a job without it, then you don't have any rights.
Well, deception, censorship, campaigns, and the erosion of your freedoms. We are still living in the aftermath of the pandemic and the dangerous policies that were implemented. Are there still residual effects? And what new information is coming to light? Well, today we're going to find out. But first, joining me around the table is April Simons. How are you?
I am good, and I'm ready for some cold, hard truth.
Yep. That's right. Yep. This is one place you can hear it.
All the time.
So, Kendra Kelly Dean, how are you?
This is definitely a good place to hear the truth.
That's true. It's true. Nobody owns us except Jesus.
That's right. Amen.
Rachel Lamb Brown, how are you?
Please never stop being bold. I think that's why people come here, because they appreciate that they know that they're always going to get all the information and get to make a decision based off the facts that are presented.
Amen. Cindy Murdoch, how are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
So this is important to keep talking about what's going on.
We just have to.
Yeah, we really do.
Have to somehow help people have the courage and the boldness to stand.
Yes.
With truth.
All right, well, he is a lawyer who has been fighting for your rights and standing up for truth. Please welcome Aaron Siri. How are you?
Good to see everybody.
It's kind of mysterious music. Dun, 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 dun.
A little ominous.
Yeah, a little ominous. Well, welcome back to the table.
Thank you.
I hope we can get some good updates today.
Great.
In the fight against what?
Taking away your right to say no to mandated medicine.
Yes, that's so good. Well, from fighting for the release of Pfizer's documents regarding the COVID vaccine to taking on cases regarding religious exemptions and more, Aaron has been at the forefront of standing up for freedom, and he's here to tell us about the latest issues as well as talk about the new data that's now coming to light. Okay, well, let's talk first about the Pfizer data. That was one of the first big fights right here in Fort Worth. Tell everybody about that and what happened and what's continuing to happen.
Yeah, well, the FDA licensed the COVID-19 vaccine based on the documents submitted to the FDA by Pfizer. The FDA took 108 days to review those documents. And at the end of that, they said, we have determined that the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine is safe and effective. And then they licensed it, knowing full well that once they licensed it, as we now know actually from some of the emails, internal emails we've now received, that it would then become mandated in various parts of this country. And in fact, that was part of the impetus for the FDA, in particular, Dr. Peter Marks, who runs the vaccine division, to license it. So in 108 days, they reviewed all those documents submitted by Pfizer. Well, our client, the Informed Consent Action Network, ICANN, wanted to see those documents. What did the FDA review? What did they rely upon? Not only did our client, ICANN, want to see it, but a group of thousands of doctors around this country all came together and formed a coalition. And that coalition then became a plaintiff in the lawsuit that we brought to demand that the FDA release those documents to the public. The FDA wanted to release them at the rate of 500 pages a month. They initially told us there's 450,000 pages, so that would have taken over 75 years. And we're very heartened that in the lawsuit, as you mentioned, right here in Fort Worth, Texas, an incredible decision by an incredibly smart and thoughtful judge decided that the FDA has to release it at the rate of 55,000 pages a month, which means it should have all been released by November 2022. Well, it would have all been released had the FDA been transparent about the fact that, in fact, it's more than 450,000 pages. So it's going to take just a few more months. The FDA is saying it'll be done by the end of this year, but we're already at over 700,000 pages. We'll have the full data set, and that should be available to the public. And then once it's fully available, scientists from around this country can start actually doing real analysis of what it is the FDA actually relied upon when they licensed
Right,
that
because you
vaccine.
can't actually analyze it until you have the full set of documents.
That's right.
Well, you know, recently Senator Ron Johnson raised objections to 50 pages of emails between Anthony Fauci, Francis Collins, and Jeremy Farrar being redacted despite Congress's right to see the information. Take a look.
You have produced 350 pages to us in the reading room. For over a year, we've been asking for the last 50 pages. This is what the 50 pages look like, okay? Now, again, I would argue congressional oversight should not be subject to the same redactions that were applied under a FOIA request. I'm asking you, will you commit today to provide our oversight? And Senator Paul is on this now. Again, we had 5 members of Homeland Security Governmental Affairs under a law that says you shall provide this. Will you commit to provide us the last 50 pages of communication between Anthony Fauci, Francis Collins, Jamie Farrar, as relates to the origin of the coronavirus? Will you commit to that?
Senator, I absolutely will commit to make sure we follow up with you on your request to get some of that information. Again, this is in compliance with the law that you receive the information. I don't know what particular statute with regard to disclosure was applied here, but you are absolutely entitled to the information that by law a member of the Senate or the House should get.
Again, you're not complying with the law because you're redacting things, for example, under deliberative process between and within agencies, and it's communication outside of the agencies with the welcome trust. Again, these redactions are not complying with the law.
Well, aside from this being a blatant violation of Congress oversight, you are also submitting a Freedom of Information Act request regarding these emails. And of course, tell us about that. And really, Anthony Fauci looks worse and worse every day.
Well, you know, whenever somebody wants to come and do by force what they can't do by persuasion, that's never a good look. And the more you do it, the more it just destroys and tears at your soul because it's destructive. As for these particular 50 pages, as we do routinely for ICANN, we are submitted a Freedom of Information Act to get copies of those 50 pages, and then we're going to go to federal court if they're not released. We have about approximately 1,000 FOIA requests that we've done on their behalf to pretty much all to federal health agencies and all to uncover the truth, because we need to undo all of their claims because that they use as a basis for taking away our civil and individual rights to choose what medical products we put on our bodies.
Well, you know, after several years of speculation and denial, the U.S. Congress has finally put the wheels in motion to take on the task of investigating the origin of COVID. Take a look.
In early 2020, COVID-19 descended on the world and subsequently every state in America. Businesses halted, communities were shut down, and millions of lives were lost worldwide. Now, after several years of fallout, both leaders and the public are asking, where did the virus come from?
Some have contended that there's really no point in investigating the origin of this virus. I strongly disagree. There is a global need to know what we are dealing with in COVID virus because it affects how we approach the problem to try to prevent the next pandemic.
So at the beginning of 2023, Congress began hearings for the COVID-19 Origin Act, a bill that would require the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to declassify all information relating to the potential links between the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the origin of COVID-19. By March 10th, the act passed in the Senate unanimously and in the House of Representatives by a vote of 419 to 0. And on March 20th, President Biden signed the act into law.
President Biden signed a bill yesterday that directs the federal government to declassify information about the origins of COVID-19.
Now, the government has 90 days to hand over to the American people all the information they have about the origins of COVID-19. What intelligence will Congress uncover? Will we finally know the truth, or will the public continue to be kept in the dark?
Well, now we know that the FBI issued a statement regarding the origin of COVID. And so what do you think the American people are going to really expect from this new bill? And from a legal standpoint, what do you see coming forth from it And where are they getting the information from to find out the origin of COVID?
Well, to be clear, the bill is not about releasing the information about the origin of COVID writ large. It's very narrow. It only wants information about the origin of COVID from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Separately, it only is to be released to Congress. And there is, even within that bill, the ability for them to redact certain information. So it remains to be seen what we'll get.
And so, of course, we saw Biden signing yes, you know,
Yes.
he was, but the truth about what our president can do is what concerning this?
Right. The decision on whether something should be withheld as a national security interest is completely 100% within the decision-making authority purview of the President of the United States. It took an act of Congress, a bipartisan act, literally passing a law to get him to have to release this information. Obviously, he's not going to veto it where it was unanimous within the House to pass it. It's veto-proof. So now he, maybe he's acting like, yes, I'm all for transparency, but if he really wanted transparency, he could have done it all along. What those documents show, I could only take a gander to, but they certainly didn't want to be transparent about them until now.
But you do know what some of the Pfizer documents show, and of course you were able to get the vSafe data. Explain what that is. And VAERS, you've heard me talk about, which stands for Vaccine
Adverse Events Reporting System.
Yes. But those two systems that would report different side effects, et cetera, et cetera. Talk about that, and then also just share a little bit about what you've discovered from the Pfizer documents that have been released under court order.
So, in an extremely abridged format, I'll say that VAERS used to be the premier vaccine safety system. That's what the CDC and FDA would tell the public. I guess to their credit admission, they realized VAERS has serious issues, so they decided to roll out vSafe as a new system to track the safety of the COVID-19 vaccines, and they rolled that out along with the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine. That's a system which Americans can sign up when they get the shot, and then they get a daily survey to fill out on their smartphone, and then a survey every week for 6 weeks, and then at 3, 6, and 12 months. 10 million Americans signed up for vSafe and reported back to the CDC their effects from the COVID-19 vaccine. On behalf of ICANN, we demanded to see that data. The CDC refused. Wow. 2 federal lawsuits a year and a half later, they finally capitulated and released the check-the-box vSafe data. And now that we have it, what we see is that of those 10 million users who didn't sign up because they had an issue with the vaccine, they signed up, most of them in the first few months after the rollout, not because these were no mandates, these were the enthusiasts.
Yeah.
These 10 million users, 7.7% of them reported needing medical care.
Wow.
After the COVID-19 vaccine. The fact that a drug or a vaccine causes harm shouldn't be surprising. What should be incredibly concerning is that the CDC hid that information and fought to hide it from the public for over a year and a half, and it took 2 federal lawsuits until they finally capitulated and released it. That data point represents probably the best data point about the safety of the COVID-19 vaccine, in addition to the 7.7% that reported needing medical care. And 70% of those, by the way, were hospitalization, emergency room, urgent care. And on average, 2 or 3 times per person seeking that care.
So serious.
Serious. You don't go back to the hospital or emergency more than once because you got a cough.
And we're talking about thousands of people that volunteer.
I mean, 7%
out of 10 million, you're talking.
That's a lot.
700,000 of them sought medical care. And there were over 2.2, I believe, million instances, which means on average, like I said, each one of those people on average sought medical care 2 to 3 times per person. Wow. Another 25%, separate than the 7.7%, reporting being unable to perform normal daily activities or missing school or work.
So it never said why they needed medical care.
That's an excellent question. There was a free text field that users could fill out, and they've received, I understand, over 6.8 million free text field entries that are limited to 250 characters. The CDC is refusing to release that information, and that is an ongoing fight.
So that could actually talk about some of the occurrences that happened with the vaccine to people. If someone said, my dad had a heart attack or there were blood clots or...
It could explain why they went to the hospital. Right. vSafe was an incredible opportunity for the CDC to actually really assess safety. The issue with VAERS is that you don't know what universe of people you're getting reports from. So you don't have a denominator, so to speak, so you can't calculate a rate. With vSafe, you got 10 million users. So if you had a box for myocarditis and 500,000 checked it, 5% rate, right? But they didn't include check the box options for what they themselves, the CDC itself, had identified before the launch of vSafe as the most likely potential issues from this vaccine.
So they didn't have a box for death.
No, we even have gotten a copy of the vSafe protocol that the CDC issued. And in that protocol, when you go to the very last page, and you can find this on the ICANN website, it has a list of what they call adverse events of special interest in a table entitled pre-specified medical conditions. And in that table, in the very document used to design vSafe, it lists myocarditis, pericarditis, blood clotting issue, all of the issues, transverse myelitis, stroke, death, all the issues that you are seeing with the vaccine were in there, listed by the CDC, should have been part of the design of vSafe before it was launched, and they didn't include check the box options. They relegated those things to that free text field. Query whether they did that so that
Which means they knew all along.
They
chose not to include it.
They didn't want.
Exactly.
They did not want to include it. It was intentional.
I mean, it's not even a hidden thing. The presentation they gave, the CDC gave at their vaccine committee, listed these. They have it in peer-reviewed studies before the launch of the first vaccine. This is one of the best pieces of evidence, I think, that shows they knew it could cause these harms, and they purposely chose not to include them. At least include, like, chest pain as an option, and they did.
But there still is information that you're going to get, hopefully, that you're still going after that they haven't released. Well, with the constantly shifting efficacy numbers, many parents are of course, they're wanting to opt out of vaccinating their children, but their rights are being challenged even now over this. Take a look.
Since the outbreak of COVID-19, studies from various doctors have proven the dangers of mass vaccinations and the implications they have on the future of healthcare and the human body.
These leaky vaccines don't prevent transmission or spread or disease or death in studies from around the world.
Where we mandate vaccines in people who've already had it. This is not a civil liberties thing. This is a medical poor decision.
But now, the shot that was intended to stop the spread has a new target: our American children. With increasing death rates and adverse reactions reported surrounding the COVID-19 vaccine, many parents believe it's their right to decide what vaccines are necessary for their child. But with the COVID shot being added to the CDC child and immunization schedule, that right is potentially being stripped away.
We want some long-term studies that's years down the road that there's not going to be any negative adverse effect for children.
It should be our choice whether or not we choose to vaccinate our children and our children to go to school. This is a clear division, and I'm completely against that.
All parents should have a choice whether their child is vaccinated or not.
As parents fight for their right to say no, now more than ever, it's vital that we stand against the attacks being inflicted on today's younger generation.
Well, even now, given what we know, these shots are still being pushed on our children. And so for you, how troubling is that? I mean, you've got young children, I've got grandchildren.
It's incredibly troubling. At the end of the day, almost all the work that we do around vaccines, and particularly in policy, as you know, our firm's got over 30 people who exclusively do pretty much vaccine work. We've got a vaccine injury practice, vaccine exemption practice, where we help people from work get exemptions, school, immigration, and in the military. And then at the core of that is policy. And all of that is focused in large part around assuring the right to say no. Because you can't fix everything. You're not going to make pharma companies do good clinical trials. You can't force them to do it. You can't force federal regulators to do their job well. But at the end of the litany of all of those parade of horribles, you got to have the right to say no. And if you don't have that right, then there's no way for you to protect yourself and your family. And when it comes to the COVID vaccine and it being added to the childhood schedule, the Informed Consent Action Network has told our firm and authorized us to challenge any state that decides to mandate the COVID-19 vaccine for school. ICANN also supported a challenge to San Diego's COVID vaccine mandate, which we struck down, and we just got that strike down affirmed on appeal, and we intend to challenge it in any other state. I'll point out one other thing about adding the COVID vaccine to the childhood schedule that is so disturbing. What you just showed is the actual schedule itself, right? There's a second page to that if you pull up the schedule. And on that page, it actually shows different conditions that child might have. Maybe they're HIV, maybe they have cancer, maybe they have heart conditions and so forth. And it tells you whether or not they should get any one of the vaccines on the schedule. Guess what it says under the column for heart conditions for COVID-19 vaccine? It recommends getting the shot.
What? Goodness.
Yes.
Wow.
It recommends giving a 1-year-old baby that has a heart condition a COVID-19 vaccine. That is our Centers for Disease Control.
Wow, when we know for sure from all of our cardiologists, doctors, and friends that have seen these young men, from teenage to 30 years old with myocarditis from the COVID vaccine. It's like insanity.
But it's not. It's their religion.
Yeah.
It is a belief system.
Religion,
It is a belief system.
Right.
They are a policy organization. For example, they have something called the MMWR, which is viewed as when they publish studies in there, it's taken as scientific dogma in America. The MMWR is not a peer-reviewed journal. It goes through something called the internal clearance process of the CDC that make sure that those studies align with the CDC policy, okay? But yet those same MMWR studies get then bandied about on CNN and MSNBC as, this new study, you heard breaking news, new study finds. But no study that's contrary to the CDC policy would ever end up getting published in MMWR. It is not a science organization. It is a policy organization. It only will release data that fits. That's why the V-Safe data probably never get made public.
Well, Aaron was recently involved in a significant win for religious liberty involving members of the United States Air Force. Take a look.
It's a shame that to stand up for a constitutional right, we need to engage lawyers. But at the same time, knowing we have lawyers like you fighting for us, it means the world.
These members of the Air Force, they swear an oath to the Constitution to uphold it. And the first freedom under the Constitution is the right to religious freedom. They're asked to lay down their lives to defend that right. And so the first people whose rights to religious freedom we should be protecting are the people standing behind me who do so, swear an oath to do so, and are sworn duty-bound to pay the ultimate sacrifice to defend those rights. And we're proud to be here today, co-counsel, all of them coming out to stand by that right, to stand firm in that right, because by standing up for their own right to religious freedom, they stand up for that right for every American, not only on the battlefield, but here at home every single day in this country.
Well, it's hard to imagine that we would violate the religious liberties of those who've sworn to protect the United States Constitution. So quickly comment on that, what happened, and moving forward as far as people who are watching that have family members in the military.
Yeah. So the Air Force decided it was going to mandate the COVID-19 vaccine. And over 10,000 members of the Air Force submitted a religious exemption to receiving the COVID-19 vaccine, seeking an exemption. The Air Force started just denying them basically without any, but at the same time, while just denying all these religious exemptions, was granting secular exemptions actually almost automatically for various folks. Well, if you can grant a secular exemption to your COVID-19 vaccine mandate, it shows it's not the health imperative that you claim it is. If you have room for a secular exemption, you got to make room for a religious exemption.
Yes.
That is the first freedom under our Constitution. The court agreed, the Sixth Circuit agreed as well. That video you just showed was on the courthouse steps of the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, and we're very heartened that we did obtain a class-wide injunction against the Air Force from kicking out those 10,000 plus members of the Air Force who refused the COVID-19 vaccine on religious grounds.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. Yes. I just want to say, we only have a little bit of time left, but how important is it for us to stand up against so many of the freedoms that are trying to be taken away from us, and to say that if you want to get the COVID vaccine, go get it, okay? But if we don't, based on the information we have from very brilliant doctors, and we don't want to put that in our body, we should have the right, especially here in America, based on our Constitution, that we should not be mandated to put anything in our body that we don't want to.
I can't think of a more important right to fight for right now in America. Because if there's a medical product you don't want to receive and you refuse it, and you can't get a job, you can't go to school, you can't go on public transport without it, then you don't have any rights.
Right. Yeah.
So great, you could stay at home with your freedom of speech and talk to yourself. You got freedom of religion, you can pray by yourself in your house, freedom of assembly by yourself. All your constitutional rights are pretty much evaporated. You saw that at the height of COVID, you know, in the fever pitch of fear in this country. They try to take away your rights to pretty much do everything if you did not bend the knee and submit to the medical products they insisted that you received. And you're exactly right. Any American that wants to wear 14 masks, get 3 vaccines a day and live in their basement and should be free to do that.
Yeah.
Because that's freedom.
Right.
Yeah.
But anybody who doesn't want it should never be coerced to receive a medical product they don't want to receive.
So quickly, what do we do when the second pandemic, because all the elite are talking about what we're going to do when the second pandemic comes? Surely we're not going to fall for the same trick as before.
Not everybody learns from history, but they learn, as my father would say, when something happens on their own skin. And, you know, you have a whole generation right now in this country that lived through the last 3 years. And I think a significant portion of Americans realize that just going along was very dangerous. They realized the danger to their civil individual rights of what happened over the last 3 years, from censorship to their ability to participate in society and so forth. And I am hopeful if there is another virus comes around, or that people will recognize and won't just submit readily. And I hope that the elected officials in this country also recognize. I think a lot of them do. Yeah. And you see that. You see that in many states around this country. They realize, whoa, that was a mistake, what we did.
And like you said, there were people that took the vaccine and they have been hurt or damaged personally, or someone in their family has. And that will bring passion on like nothing else. Yeah. When all of a sudden you believe something, you realize it's a lie, and you have been affected by that lie, then you're going to stand up.
Yeah, I mean, there's a recent survey. I think it was there was a poll that was just done in which it found it says that 1 in 4 Americans believe they know somebody that might have died from a COVID vaccine.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. Will you come back, keep us up to date on everything going on?
Yes.
Any exciting thing? You're just going to be inundated with even more work, by the way, so get ready. But we are out of time. I want you to remember that it is important to stand up for freedom. If you get anything else out of the program today, understand that your liberty is always under threat these days, and it's vital that we take a stand for what's right. If you're watching today, maybe you're sad, maybe you've been living in fear. You know, one of the things that we do here is we put that number up on the screen because we would love the honor of praying with you, encouraging you, any way that we can help you. We want to do that. So avail yourself to that number. I do want to thank Aaron for joining us at the table. For more information on his work, you can visit him online at SiriLLP.com. And for this and all of our COVID free speech related content, you can find more at censored.daystar.com. Thank you so much for watching. And I hope this program has enlightened you and helped you to understand. And you know what? Pray for all of the people that are in this fight, and you stand up as well. Be courageous. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye for today.
This is the primal scream of a dying regime. Pray for our enemies, because we're going medieval on these people. You're not got a free shot on all these networks lying about the people. The people have had a belly full of it. I know you don't like hearing that. I know you try to do everything in the world to stop that, but you're not going to stop it. It's going to happen.
And where do people like that go to share the big lie? MAGA media. I wish in my soul, I wish that any of these people had a conscience.
Ask yourself, what is my task and what is my purpose? If that answer is to save my country, this country will be saved.
War Room. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
We're truly in a time where we do need to start helping and turning this country around. And I am really impressed with these New York Republicans. All right, maybe they're not as conservative as I am, but you know what? They care about their city. I was with some of them last night and they said, we're not going to abandon New York. We're not giving up. We're not abandoning